Firstly, let us begin by looking at the origins of 40 hadith. What is so important about the 40 hadith? Once one of my cousins asked me, do you know how many hadiths are there in Islam? There are only 40, aren't there? Because he'd never known of any of the book besides the 40 hadith. So he felt there were only 40 hadith, and he was quite surprised when I told him that I studied 2 years. Well, I spent 2 years studying hadith. And he's like, why do you spend 2 years studying hadith for when there's only 40 of them in the first place? But never mind, we'll talk about the genesis of Arba'in, or the 40 hadith, the genre of collecting 40 hadiths. Firstly, we see that the origins or the impetus behind collecting 40 hadiths begins with a statement from the Prophet ﷺ. Now, this hadith comes through various variants, i.e. different wordings, and I've tried to look at the most salient variants, and hopefully I'll present them in front of you. The first one comes from Abu Darda radiallahu ta'ala an. He mentions that if someone preserves 40 hadiths for my community about its deen, Allah will resurrect him a faqih. Faqih is a jurist, a diligent, intelligent person, and I will be an intercessor. I will be an intercessor and witness for him on the day of judgment. So there are 3 things in this hadith for anyone who preserves 40 hadith for the community. One is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will resurrect him a faqih, which is a jurist or an intelligent person, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam will be an intercessor for him, a shafa'ah, and a witness for him on the day of judgment. Another variant comes through Ibn Abbas, where he mentions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will resurrect him in the company of the fuqaha, or the jurists and scholars. Another variant from Ibn Abbas again mentions that if anyone preserves 40 hadith of the sunnah, I will be an intercessor for him on the day of judgment. Another variant comes from Abu Wa'il, who narrates from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, that I will give him the benefit of it, benefit of memorizing the 40 hadith and preserving them, and he will be told, enter into Jannah through any gate you wish. So here there's an extra reward, that he will have the liberty to enter into Jannah through any of the 7 doors that he wishes. And perhaps the most gharib or rare variant I found from Ibn Abbas was that he will receive the reward of 71 truthful prophets. Anyone who memorizes the 40 hadith will receive the reward of 71 truthful prophets. This hadith has been narrated, apart from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Ibn Abbas and Abu Darda that I mentioned, from Ali ibn Abi Talib, Abdullah ibn Umar, Abu Huraira, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, Abu Umama al-Bahili, and Anas ibn Malik. All of these Sahabas seem to have narrated this hadith. What is striking about it, though, is that none of them are authentic. Authentic proper, if we use the term sahih, none of them fulfill the conditions of the sahih. Nonetheless, what we find is that the scholars of hadith have shown certain laxity or a degree of latitude towards this hadith, and they have felt that the specific rule that when you have dozens of ahadith, the weakness of which is subject to improvement, i.e. can be improved and the weakness can be alleviated. And the second condition is that especially when there is no claim for establishing an obligation in religion, then this can be accepted. This can be accepted. So the scholars from the very beginning have seemed to accept this hadith and started writing the 40 hadiths. Perhaps the first author in this genre is Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, who was quite strikingly a muhaddith, a faqih, as he was a traditionalist, a jurist, a mujahid, a Sufi, and an entrepreneur. He was a businessman too. And he had distributed or scheduled 4 months for each task. So he spent 4 months in hadith, 4 months in jihad, 4 months in this, 4 months in and so forth. And his first collection of the 40 was Arba'in al-Jihad, was 40 hadith on the jihad. Imam Nawawi seems to agree with this, that probably Ibn al-Mubarak was the first scholar to collect 40 hadiths. Although the famous chronicler and cataloger Katib al-Shalabi from the Ottoman Empire mentions that from Ibn Abdullah al-Mubarak, there have been innumerable compilations of 40s on the genre. Abdullah ibn Mubarak, An-Nawawi mentions about him that every time I invoke his name, I can feel the blessings descending. عند ذكر الصالحين تنزل الرحمة. And Ibn Mubarak is also, he died in 150 by the way. 150 was the same year that Abu Hanifa passed away. He was known and he is recalled for making the legal school, the legal right of Abu Hanifa more acceptable in the traditionist circles. Yes, let's move on. Katib al-Shalabi mentions that there have been innumerable compilations after Abdullah ibn Mubarak, and each scholar dedicated the 40 to a specific theme. So you had the 40 on, say, the Sifat, 40 on Tawheed, 40 on the Usul of Deen, which An-Nawawi mentioned, and which is perhaps the most famous one. And then it became more of a fun or a science, which then began to show greater levels of creativity. So then you had scholars like Ibn Hajar and Ibn Asakir, who started off this trend of narrating 40 hadiths from 40 different shuyukh. Al-Arba'in al-Mutabayinati bis-Sama', which is inshallah part of the Arba'in series coming, inshallah, forthcoming. And perhaps the apex of this science in terms of its creativity ends with the great scholar Ibn Asakir, the chief giant, about whom An-Nawawi mentions huwa min ajaib ad-dunya, that he is one of the wonders of the world, who wrote, he's a chronicler and a hadith, a traditionist first, very strong Shafi'i as well. And he has written a book called Tarikh Dimashq, the history on Damascus, which is in 60 volumes plus at the present moment as it stands. His Arba'in is basically a tradition, or a compilation of 40 hadiths which are narrated through 40 different Sahabas, which come through 40 different shuyukh in 40 different places on 40 different topics. And the beauty of it is that the literary motif which he somehow manages to succeed in establishing is that he starts from the most sacred of the Sahaba, who is Abu Huraira, starting in the most sacred place is Mecca, and somehow correlating each tradition to bring this wonderful rosary as it stands. Well, you can wait for that. Inshallah, that is also part of the Arba'in series. Now let us move to the 40 of Shah Waliullah Muhaddith ad-Dihlawi. What is, where is the value of this compilation, and where does it lie? Well, the 40 which Shah Waliullah compiled over here, one of the most striking parts, there's three striking parts in this. One is that Shah Waliullah narrated this from his teacher Abu Tahir al-Madani, whose father was the famous Ibrahim al-Kurdi. It goes in an uninterrupted chain to Imam Hassan ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib. And he heard this from the Imam of Haramain. Like I said, the Imam of Haramain, Abu Tahir al-Madani. What is also striking about this is that it's very scant words, small words, but they are full of meaning. And that the contents of each hadith are very simple. As I shall mention in the section of Shah Waliullah's reform, of Shah Sahib's reform, that the Shah had this specific program of trying to educate the masses in the Quran and Hadith, and this is particularly part of that reform. So anyway, that's for the 40 hadith. That's completed.